Welcome to Living Part S. Today I'd like to take a look at two different prophetic visions within the book of Daniel, which prophesy about the last days. Though every generation has believed us to be in the last days, I would like to show you that our generation, at this present time, is actually in the last days. This can be seen through the prophecies found within the book of Daniel. In fact, it states that the understanding of the book of Daniel would remain sealed until the end, meaning that the book of Daniel would not be unsealed until the prophetic visions were fulfilled. With this being said, I would like to show you the exact date and time within our current generation that the book of Daniel became opened. Once this occurred, it allowed us to know the actual end times or last days had begun. Through the years, many have believed that they understood the prophecies of Daniel. However, the book itself stated that the understanding of the book would remain hidden until the time of the end. Therefore, if people hold to traditions based on understandings which were developed prior to the opening of the book, those people should go back and reevaluate their beliefs, as until the present age, true understanding of the book of Daniel was not fully available. Once we understand the time at which the book of Daniel was opened, we can begin to see a timeline for the coming of Messiah. At this time, we will only be looking at Daniel's prophecies as they relate to the books Unsealing and the Last Days, which are found in Daniel chapters 8 and 12. Once we find the date of the unsealing within chapter 8, we will also find that chapter 12 provides us with the same date. These two witnesses within the book of Daniel will then allow us to find other signs within the earth which point to the return of Messiah. With this being said, you will likely hear things within this video that you have never heard before. Let me say that throughout history, many have attempted to calculate the time of Messiah's return. However, none have been successful. Though many may argue that no one can know the day or hour of his return, I would suggest that we do have clear clues within the scriptures that reveal a timeline of events. Yet, these clues need a center point from where the countdown began. I believe the countdown began with the unsealing of the book of Daniel. First, as with all of our videos, I would like to point out that when we read Daniel, we must understand that he is a Hebrew man writing to a people of a Hebrew nation. As such, we must consider this text through a Hebraic perspective. When considering Daniel chapter 8, for the sake of time, I will only provide a summary as anyone can read the chapter on their own. In this chapter, we see that Daniel is having a vision in the third year of King Belshazzar. According to historians, this would have occurred around the year 550 BCE. Within the vision, Daniel witnessed a series of events, starting with a ram with two horns being struck by a goat with one horn. The goat horn becomes great and then breaks, and four smaller horns arise from it. Then out of one of the four horns, another smaller horn arises, and it too becomes great. It tramples on the stars of heaven, it takes away the regular burnt offering, and overthrows the sanctuary. We find that the hosts will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then it states in 13 through 14 that Daniel heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is this vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot?" And he said to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful state." I would like you to notice this phrasing here. It does not say 2,300 days, but rather 2,300 evenings and mornings. It also states that after 2,300 evenings and mornings, the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful state. After this, the vision is interpreted. In verse 19 it states, "He said, Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation," for it refers to the appointed time of the end. It then goes on to explain that the ram with the two horns represents the kings of the Medes and Persians. The goat with one horn represents Greece. The goat horn should obviously be seen as Alexander the Great, as when the one horn broke, four other smaller horns arose. One Alexander the Great defeated the Medes and the Persians. Second, when he died in 323 BC, 4 horns arose from his kingdom. This represents how the Greek Empire was split up between 4 different mini-kingdoms, or between 4 different Greek rulers. The first was Cassander, who ruled Greece. Lysimachus ruled Asia Minor. Seleucus ruled Babylon and Persia. And the Ptolemy ruled Egypt and Israel. Then, as it stated, 1 horn came out from the 4 horns. We know that out of the empire of Seleucus came Antiochus Epiphanes, who went out conquering and expanded his empire, claiming the land of Israel. Remember, we want to focus on Israel and its perception of this vision. He is believed by many to be called the abomination of desolation, for in 167 BC, he outlawed Judaism. He made Hellenism the official religion of Judea and trampled the temple. He went as far as to slaughtering pigs in the temple. He even made himself to be God, as the word Epiphanes of Antiochus Epiphanes means God manifest. After this, it states in verse 26 that the vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. So we know through chapter 8 that this vision was sealed as it was meant for many days from now. The vision was also speaking about the latter end of the indignation, or the appointed time of the end. In other words, this vision was sealed until the latter end of the indignation for a time appointed. Yet one must ask, if it is sealed to the end, when did it begin? We find the answer when it states, this vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot. In other words, from the start of the vision, it will last 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful state. According to this, the vision begins with the ram with 2 horns striking the goat with 1 horn, and it lasts until the end of the sanctuary being trampled underfoot. Yet again, we see that it states evenings and mornings, not days. This is the key to understanding when the time of the end is. You see, when we consider this phrase, we find that it links to something in particular. As you may have seen in our last videos, there is a concept within the Hebraic tradition known as Pardes, where we, at the Darash level, compare texts throughout Scripture to form greater understandings of something being hinted at or revealed in the text. This phrase, in particular, is making reference to a certain event as found in Exodus chapter 12. According to 6-10, during the feast of Pesach, or Passover, a lamb is slain at twilight, or in the evening. Then it is roasted and eaten until morning. In the morning, anything that is left is to be burned up or discarded. In this we see that the actual feast of Passover occurs between the evening and the morning. The reason that Daniel did not say days is because he was referencing the evenings and mornings of Pesach, or Passover. Therefore, the 2,300 evenings and mornings is referencing 2,300 feasts of Pesach, or Passover. When we then consider that the sealing of the book starts with the vision, and the vision begins with the battle between the ram's 2 horns and the goat's 1 horn, we find that the start of this prophecy would begin with the battle between Alexander the Great and the Medes and Persians. This battle would be the Battle of Granicus, which occurred in May of 334 BC. Yet, though the battle occurred in May of 334 BCE, we do not start counting 2,300 Passovers until the following spring, as Passover had already passed when the battle began in May of 334. So we begin counting 2,300 Passovers starting the following year of 333 BCE. Since we start in 333 BCE, we know that the time of the end, or the time that the sealing of the book ends, is 2,300 Passovers later, when the sanctuary and the hosts stop being trampled underfoot, and the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful state. If you calculate 2,300 Passovers, starting with the Passover of 333 BCE, you find that it falls on the Passover of 1967. If we know your history of modern Israel, you will find that the Passover of 1967 was the final Passover before the state of Israel, or the Jews, regained possession of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. This made the Temple Mount officially a part of the state of Israel, or the sanctuary was restored to its rightful state. I would suggest that the time of the end, when the vision within the book of Daniel was fulfilled and the book became unsealed, officially occurred on Passover of 1967. How amazing is it that after exactly 2,300 Passovers to the day, the Temple Mount and Jerusalem was reclaimed by its rightful owners? You see, ever since the Babylonian captivity, the Jews have never been the official owners of Judea. They were just living in a land that was always controlled by occupational forces, whether it was Babylon, the Persians, the Greeks, Rome, or the Islamic Caliphate. Yet, 2,300 Passovers after the Battle of Granicus began, when Alexander the Great started the conquest of the Medes and the Persians, the Temple Mount was taken back by its people, who were an independent state, no longer trodden underfoot by occupational forces. Yet, as you may know if you've watched my previous videos, I only feel comfortable teaching things that have at least two witnesses of the truth. As it states, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word will be established. So setting aside Pesach 1967, let us look at a different section of Daniel to see if this time can be confirmed with another witness. In order to move on to Daniel chapter 12, we must get our bearings. We find that Daniel 11 gives us a picture of the conquests and or the occupiers of the land of Israel, from the Persians to the Greeks, to Ptolemy, to the Seleucid, to the Romans, with the end being the Islamic Caliphate. After this, we come into chapter 12 and find a continuation of chapter 11 with, "Now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress, such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. And those who have insight will shine like the glow of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever." In this, I believe that it shows a time of immense tribulation, of the like that has never been seen before in world history. From a Hebraic or Jewish perspective, it could very well be speaking of a time just before and up until World War II and the Holocaust. Not just because of the death of the 6 million Jews, but the other 60 million people that died from the war. In my opinion, Daniel chapter 12, 2 and 3 points to a time which we are in the process of, and will shortly come to pass, as it speaks about a time of rescue, when the book of life is opened, and as we are currently looking into the unsealing of the book of Daniel, I believe these to be related. If you would like to know more about this, please like and comment your desire to find out more about it. As we move into Daniel chapter 12:4, we find that Daniel could not comprehend what he saw, and therefore it was shut up and sealed in the book until the time of the end. It states, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge will be increased." In this we find clues which reveal to us things that will be present in the time of the end. Many will be running to and fro, and knowledge will be increased. Then we find in verse 5 and 6 that Daniel asks, "How long shall it be until the end of these wonders?" Note that this reference is being made to wonders that started in the last chapter and finishes in chapter 12, or from the Persians until the unsealing of the book. In verse 7 it then states, "And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and a half a time. And that when the shattering of the power of the holy people is completed, then all of these things would be finished." So when the question is asked of how long it should be to the end of these wonders, we find the answer to be that there will be a period of time which consists of a time, times, and a half a time. And during that period of time, the shattering of the power of the holy people will be accomplished. In other words, his holy people will be scattered during this period known as the times, and half a time. Then all of these things, the completion of the wonders, will come to an end. In verse 8, we again see that Daniel does not understand, as it states, "And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" Notice here that he again is referencing the end of these things, or the end times, which we also saw in Daniel chapter 8. Then in verse 9 it states, "And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end." So from Daniel's perception, the understanding of this vision was closed up and sealed until the time of the end, just as we saw in chapter 8. Then as we proceed, it states, "Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked will do wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand, but the wise will understand." And from the time period that the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is established or set up, then there shall be 1290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1335 days. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of these days. So in this section we find three different time frames. The first being time, times, and a half a time. This traditionally is believed to be equivalent to 3.5 years, or 1260 days. I would like to share with you a little known tradition that was unique to the Babylonian captivity, where Daniel was residing. When the Jews were in Babylon, they adopted a lunar solar calendar that was different from their typical lunar calendar and also different from the later full solar calendars. During the exile, this Babylonian lunisolar calendar was adopted. Like the Hebrew calendar, it had 12 months of either 29 or 30 days. But it also had a new feature, a leap month, which was added to certain years on a fixed schedule. This leap month made sure that the seasons always occurred at the proper time in terms of climate, avoiding a drifting of the seasons. Because of this adopted calendar, it was found that over time, even with a leap month, it required an extra day. This had to be added to the calendar every 228 years. And this was used to make sure that the Feast of Passover remained within the barley harvest season. Remember how the Feast of Passover played a key role in chapter 8? We also find that it plays a key role in chapter 12. This tradition is that a time is the adding of one extra day to the calendar year every 228 years, thereby making a time equal to 228 years. The times then equals 2 times 228 years, or 456 years. And a half time would be half of 228 years, or 114 years. So the grand total of a time, times, and a half a time would equal 798 years. This 798 years would be the first number in our timeline. And as we saw earlier, this number establishes the period of time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up until the finale, which is the shattering of the power of the holy people. Then we would have to start to count the other two numbers. As we saw in chapter 8, the regular burnt offering ceased and the abomination of desolation was set up in the temple by Antiochus Epiphanes. According to history, this occurred in December of 167 BCE. If we again follow the rule with Passovers, then the count would start in the spring of 166 BCE. If we then count 798 Passovers starting in 166 BCE, we land on Passover of 632 CE. Do you know what happened in 632 CE? Muhammad died, and the Islamic Caliphate was born. This Islamic Caliphate then rose up against the Roman Byzantine forces and conquered the land of Israel, which was the final occupational forces that took control of the land. Thus, in 632 CE, the final shattering of the holy people was established, which was the Islamic Caliphate. Better yet, in this we find the point at which we start the count of the next two numbers. These are 1290 years and 1335 years. If we look at 632 CE as the starting point of the countdown, then we would add 1290 years. This takes us to 1922. In 1922, we find that this was officially when the Islamic Caliphate, which became known as the Ottoman Empire, ceased to exist. Islam still existed, however, the empire was no more. Do you understand how exciting and precise this is? That a book written over 2,000 years ago prophesied the exact time frame of 1290 years, of which the Islamic Caliphate was birthed and ended, which was the last occupational force to control the land of Israel. At the same time, in 1922, we find that the Palestine Mandate was created by the League of Nations. This mandate gave Britain the administrative powers over the land of Israel. The mandate also required Britain to put into effect the Balfour Declarations, which declared the land the national home of the Jewish people. Because of this, it allowed the Jews to move back to the land who were seeking refuge during World War II, and led to the partitioning of the land of Palestine by the United Nations in 1947. This also in turn led to the creation of Israel as an independent state in 1948. 1922 was a very significant year in history, allowing the shattering of the holy people to stop and allowing the exiles to return back to the land. Now we have to consider the final number, which is 1,335 years. It says that those people will be blessed that make it to 1,335 years. With 632 CE being our center point, and we add 1,335 years to it, we find that it takes us back to 1967. And the reason why they are blessed is because after Passover of 1967, this generation of Jews took back Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. They no longer had to be scattered throughout the earth, but could return home to a land that did not have Gentile rulers or controlling occupational forces. Or in other words, it fulfills Daniel 12:13, where it states, "Go your way till the end, and you will rest and will stand in your allotted place at the end of these days." With this being said, this should demonstrate a second witness within the book of Daniel, revealing that the visions were unsealed in 1967, further proclaiming that Passover in 1967 officially started the time of the end. Isn't this exciting? Two separate visions within Daniel pointing out the same mystery and the exact same time and date for the beginning of the end times. This should then give us a center point for the prophecies of the end times. For example, if we consider the teachings of Yeshua or Jesus in Matthew 24, we find that he is discussing the end times. And though I am not going into detail about what this section states, we do see that he speaks about what signs will be present in the earth at the time of the end, as well as the return of Messiah. Yeshua says in verse 33, "So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." This is the generation of the end times. And if we consider that this generation of the end times started on Passover of 1967, we only have to calculate how long a generation is to understand when the return or the coming of the Son of Man will be. As it states that this generation will not pass away until all these things are fulfilled. In Psalms 90, verse 10, it states, "The length of our days is 70 years, or 80 if we are strong. Yet their pride is but labor and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away." In this we see that a generation is considered 70 years. So if we consider 1967 as the date or the start of the end times, and we find that this generation will not pass away before all those things are fulfilled, then we find that the latest date that this could occur by is 2037. Now, I am not saying that the return will be in 2037. However, I believe that according to this interpretation, the return must occur prior to 2037. This means within our generation, we should be seeing the fulfillment of Matthew 24. And if you remember, one sign that it states in Daniel would be present at the time of the end would be that knowledge would be increased. If we consider that knowledge will be increased, it should not surprise anyone that the very next year, the day after Pentecost, or June 3rd, 1968, Hewlett-Packard began marketing the first mass-marketed PC and the world's first desktop computer. This event in history marked the beginning of the growth of knowledge worldwide, as it eventually took mankind to a place where a large portion of human knowledge is accessible to everyone worldwide. It should also be noted that in 1967, the United Kingdom passed the Abortion Act of 1967. Though prior to 1967, abortion was practiced throughout the world, mainly for emergencies or as part of eugenics projects, this act allowed for abortions up until 28 weeks of pregnancy, and after it was passed, much of the rest of the world followed. Why is this interesting to me? This is because throughout history, the death of the innocent always preceded the coming of the messianic figure. In Egypt, the babies were killed at the coming of Moshe or Moses. In Israel, the babies or the innocent were slaughtered at the coming of Yeshua or Jesus. Note that in 1967, the destruction of innocents began worldwide, which I believe points to how the return of the Messiah will occur. And though many people believe they understand what this return will look like, I believe it will be a surprise to most. It will literally separate the wheat from the tares. If you would like to find out more about how this return will look, or if you have questions about other things that were mentioned within this video, please leave them in the comment section. Thank you and be blessed.